We have had so many projects that we've worked on where people are desperately trying to give businesses money and cannot figure out how to do it because the UX is so poor. And so we fix that for people.
My guest today is Elizabeth Anderson. Elizabeth is the CEO and co-founder of Lunar Lab. Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Can you please introduce yourself first and the company and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Anderson. I'm CEO and co-founder of Lunar Lab. We are a woman-owned small business based in Birmingham, Alabama. We do UX design, product strategy, user research, prototyping, AI strategy, project management, product strategy, all of that kind of stuff. But basically what we do is if people are making software of any type, we make that software more profitable, more aligned to their goals, more strategic, more likely to succeed. But also we're a certified B-Corp, so we make that software more ethical, inclusive, and accessible.
That's very cool. I think anything you can do to increase the likelihood of success, especially for startups, is probably the most important thing and the most helpful to get people up and running to approach some of the other problems they're going to face once they become successful. And it's also cool that it's, woman owned and a B Corp. Tell me a little bit about your story, some of the decisions that led you down this path, even from, a music major in Alabama to, an advisor and consultant for startups.
Yeah, the story for me really begins. I'm from rural Alabama. I grew up in a very small town, well below the poverty line. I had a really, really hard upbringing. It was very difficult for me when I was growing up, but I needed some way to be able to get to college. I just really wanted to be able to get out of that situation. Knew the only way that I could do that was by going to college. Most people in my situation, they play a sport, right? They play football. Maybe they go into basketball, get some nice athletic scholarships. I am not the world's most athletic person. I was probably not going to make it into the NFL. So I looked around and I said, what can I do here? And I learned how to play flute and got really, really good at it in the time that I was in high school. I was academically very successful. I was in lots of honor bands and things like that. And one of the honor bands that I went to was the University of Alabama. And the flute teacher there said, hey, you're really good. We're going to get you a music scholarship. So ended up with a music scholarship to Alabama. My situation was so bad that my guidance counselor in high school told me, even though I was at the top of my class, made really great grades, tested really well on all of our tests, she told me that she would not help me with applying to any colleges. She said it wasn't worth my time for somebody like me. So I disagreed, got to Alabama, worked on my scholarship. That was really, really helpful. Now, while I was there, I was also designing websites for people on the side. So I was doing small business website design and development just because I needed to pay my way through college, right? I was doing that. I was doing a couple other jobs. I was working really hard. But we also did a lot of electronic music in college because I was actually a music theory major. So was doing a lot of coding with that as well and just really fell in love with technology overall. Graduated, not a huge booming job market for music theory majors. Apologies to anybody who's a music theory major out there, but not a huge job market for it. Ended up in the tech industry, stayed more on the non-technical side of things for a long time until I got more into project management, release management, product strategy type of work and things like that. And so we launched Lunar Lab about 5 years ago because my co-founder and I had been in the industry for just years and years and years. We'd seen all of these technology solutions fail for various reasons, and a lot of them were really preventable, right? Like they would launch without a monetization strategy, or they would launch without, any kind of usability research or user testing or validation or anything like that. So people are launching these big products with lots of features that they have no idea if it's going to work in the marketplace. And we kind of got tired of that and got tired of seeing these situations where people would come in and they would say, I've got my life savings is $200,000 and I want to build an app with that. And people will take your money in the tech industry and they will build you a $200,000 app, whether you need that or not. And we wanted to do something different. We wanted to help people to build products that we knew were going to be successful, that were based on a solid strategic foundation and, help to guide them to prevent some of these mistakes that we saw over and over again. And just create software that we knew was going to go out and be helpful and useful in the world and stuff that we could be proud of at the end of the day.
Wow. That's great, and I'm glad that you were one of those people that looked at the guidance counselor and said, "No, I don't agree," right?
Yeah.
Because you think about how many people are in that situation and don't know any better, and this is supposed to be a person of authority, right? Who's used to kind of sizing up, where can you end up and what can you reasonably get into, and just like the demoralization of so many people, like I'm sure that just take that advice and say, "Okay, well, I'm going to do something else then at that
Yeah,
point."
100%. I think it's really easy when you grow up in a situation like I did, it's very easy to internalize a lot of the kind of stuff that is told to you over and over again. We so often hear that people below the poverty line are immoral or bad or lazy, and that none of those things are true. And I knew about myself that none of those things were true. But I also know that when we hear those kinds of things, that's not true about people. People are hardworking, just across the board. People are hardworking and smart and brilliant, and there are people trapped in poverty right now that are some of the smartest, most hardworking people you'll ever meet, and it's really devastating. But and I think that has informed so much of the work that we try to do and go out into the world and do the right thing and make stuff that's not going to be harmful, make stuff that's going to benefit people, but also help startup founders, especially startup founders from historically excluded demographic groups, because you can really build generational wealth, not just with startups, but even with a small business. And people have been locked out of that for a long time. So making that more accessible for people and making it clear that anyone can do this work.
Yes, I think you don't have to be a MIT dropout, to start a small business that can be successful and to your point can generate well over the amount of wealth that people who go down the standard like corporate track might be able to gain over their lives. And it is sad that it's not just the guidance counselor, but all along the way, you get these people that are willing to work hard, that are scrappy, that are smart and have good ideas, right? But then to your point, there's someone who has a technology advisory firm who says, yeah, we'll build you the first version of this mobile web app and you need this, this, and this. And it's just
Yeah.
if people are raw and not used to being in the field, they don't realize that, oh, the first iteration is the starting point. That's when you start engaging with customers and pulling what it actually needs to look like. It's never the final resting place. So if you waste your $200,000 more and mortgage your house on that, you're in a pretty bad position.
We telling people a lot of times, people come to us and they'll say, I want to build a mobile app. And sometimes that's great, and mobile app is exactly what you need. But there are other times that maybe a web app is a better way to go. And so we really think of ourselves as advisors or really being more consultative and saying, hey, here's kind of some market research that we're sitting on, or here's what we know about that industry from having worked in it before. I think that those conversations are very important to say, well, don't build the $200,000 product. What if we start with like a $35,000 MVP version of it and then build off of that and grow, test it in the marketplace, but also get something that's generating revenue in the marketplace out there so that you can then reinvest that revenue into the app and build something bigger and better based on actual feedback.
Yeah. I guess you're out there trying to enable the success of some of these people. But 5 years ago, if you think back to then when you first started, how did you figure out who was the right, type of company? Because it sounds like, there's all sorts of range of companies that could use your services, right? It's like, how do you identify like who has the biggest gap in those services? Who could most use your help? How did you go about finding your first couple of customers?
We have been in the industry for a long time, so we really kind of knew tech inside and out. And being able to find customers was, we worked our network and things like that. It's sort of the traditional things. In the early days, because we don't necessarily always do development in-house, we'll do a little bit of development in-house, but not all the time. We tend to keep it a little bit separated. We have really great development partners, but we were a little nervous that nobody would need only strictly the design and strategy side without the development side. So we were nervous about that. But what we found was most people either have a developer that they're already working with that they like, or we can refer them out to a development team without creating that sort of conflict of interest that comes with build me a big product, because like all the money is in development, right? And so it's very easy, I think. There's this great Upton Sinclair quote about how I'm going to mangle it a little bit, but a man will not see what his salary depends on him not seeing. And It's such a good quote. But I think about it all the time because when we are working on this stuff, we're not trying to get the big development contract. We're not just trying to design something huge. So, anyway, said all that to say that we started out with people that we knew and some of these industries that we were really well versed in. We did a lot of work. My co-founder and I actually worked together at several different companies before we started ours. When you find somebody that it works with, like, hang on to them. But we did a lot of FinTech work because we were very well versed in financial software. So we did a lot in that space. We worked our network a lot and found those initial customers. But what we found is that lots of different companies need these types of services, right? So we have some big companies where they may have a legacy product and they need a full redesign on it because it's old and it's clunky or whatever. They might need something like that. Sometimes they need staff aug, right? They need designers who can just come fit into their team. We've got other people who are startups, of course, who come to us with a twinkle in their eye. And, they've just got this idea, but they've never really worked in the tech industry before. And it's very gate kept. And, you talk to developers sometimes and they sound like they're speaking a different language and they don't know how to do it. So that works really well. We found a real niche with small businesses who are wanting to vet out different products or build a small custom solution for something that they've got that's very unique to their businesses. So all kinds of different businesses that we work with, from big to small to, tech companies to popcorn companies even. We've worked with just about everybody.
Popcorn companies. Did not see that coming, but yes, there's
Yeah,
always a business
I didn't
model.
either.
There's spent a lot of time in, Charlotte, North Carolina, and there's some good popcorn companies there. And I've spent way
Mhm.
too much money on Garrett's popcorn in Chicago as well. So don't underestimate the novel businesses that are niche. Yeah, I work a lot with in the fintech arena as well, and I find that kind of accessibility and inclusivity, they tend to lag, I feel like, in financial services and fintech, maybe behind some other industries. And how have you seen that in the work that you do and your clients? Have you seen that kind of advance? Do you feel like in the last 5 years or so that has started changing and there's more focus on inclusivity and maybe underbanked and those types of things in the customers that you're serving? Or what kind of trends are you seeing in the industry from that perspective?
Yeah, it's funny when we talk about the sort of accessible and inclusive lens. We definitely have some people who come to us for human centered design and that inclusivity piece, and they really want to make sure that their product is ethical and accessible. And then we have other people who come to us for the high quality work. And then they get the accessible, inclusive, human centered design lens as well, because it all comes together. You can't have one without the other. I would say that customers come to us sort of for both different reasons. Occasionally, we'll have people who are coming to us for sure, trying to get both. In the fintech industry, they tend to look more towards high quality and like meeting those KPIs and very invested in making sure that their customers can use their product, can use it effectively, that it's not hard to use, that we're addressing some of the needs of the underbanked folks or populations, but not necessarily heavy on the accessibility side as much as I would like for them to be. Now, that said, anything that you get from us is always going to be at a bare minimum, visually meeting those accessibility standards. So you're always going to get that from us. We're always going to advise. We do a workshop for every project, and we have a section of the workshop where it is strictly ethical design, and we talk about it. And we've got some exercises that we do to make sure that it's sort of top of mind at the beginning and then throughout the entire design process. So not necessarily something that people in the fintech space are always coming for, although I would like to see more of that. Big, big investments in the fintech space and working to make sure that you are outpacing your competitors, especially on intuitive design.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's good that you're in a place where you can, even if someone doesn't come to you necessarily for that, you can influence and kind of just make sure that the awareness is there, that some minimum standards are met. But yeah, outpacing competitors, intuitive design, definitely on the fintech side, people want to move fast, right, and get ahead of the competition. How do you think about that from your perspective for fintech companies? especially given the fact that, the additional, let's say, burden that exists in fintech a lot of the times is this like regulatory and compliance thing on top of, just making the business model work and trying to innovate quickly. So does that kind of influence your approach at all with fintechs, or how do you think about that?
We actually love working in highly regulated industries. So, of course, we work in fintech. We do a lot in healthcare. We're working on an aviation industry app right now. So you can imagine there's regulatory bodies there as well with the FAA. But we really enjoy working on highly regulated industries because it feels almost like a puzzle. So you have to know what the regulations are, and you're looking at what these constraints are and making sure that you're operating within that. Although I will say that if you are thinking about things from that human-centered, ethical, inclusive approach to things, you're typically going to be within a lot of the regulations because the regulations are focused on policy decisions that, protect consumers, right? And things like that, and making sure that you're not engaging in money laundering or there's not opportunities for fraud and things like that. So you will often see more overlap than you might think when it comes to any kind of regulation.
And that makes a lot of sense. And when we talk about kind of some of the evolution that's been happening in the space, obviously, AI is a big trendy topic. Everyone wants to use it. Everyone wants to kind of understand it and how they can use it in their business. I guess, has that created some new opportunities for you as far as maybe like quicker prototyping and being able to get, different mock-ups in front of clients quicker? Or has it conversely created some challenges or knock-on impacts that, people might not have thought about that are impacting your business?
This is actually so interesting because I feel like so often we do a lot of AI strategy and design for AI products. And I feel like so often when we have this conversation about AI, people start asking us, what AI tools are you using in design? And the truth is not a ton, right? So we have a real human touch. We're experts in this field. We've been doing it for a very long time. And we want to bring that expert level quality to our services in a way that some of the AI solutions are not able to do. Now, that being said, a couple of things that I'm seeing in the AI space. One is we've had a handful of folks have come to us at this point for more or less rescue projects. So we do project management work as well. We do strategy work, but a lot of times people are trying to build these products with by vibe coding, or they're using AI solutions to design it. And what happens there is that the quality is just it's not the technology is not ready to do that with some of these sort of off the shelf solutions that you're able to access, some of the large language models. So we'll sort of get this information in from these clients and fix it. So we've developed a robust business in fixing products that folks have worked on with vibe coding or things like that. So seeing a good bit of that at this stage in the game, which is okay. I mean, I think it's totally fine to go out and vibe code like an MVP, but you don't want to take that to market because not only is it going to be lacking that sort of human centered design or the UX that you really need, because people think of UX as being making it pretty, but it's really not. It's about helping people understand how to move through your product. So that's often missing in vibe coded products. You often have security problems that are going to create major issues for you down the road. It could be buggy, lots of kind of issues with those. And so we're fixing those. On the flip side of that, we have also worked with a lot of companies who want to implement their own AI solutions. And this is really fun because we don't like to work with companies that are just building like a GPT wrapper. So ChatGPT already exists. Why build onto it? We have several companies that we're working with though that are building their own proprietary solutions. So they have folks in house or that they're working with, or some of our development partners that we work with that are building out proprietary models. We're seeing this in the fintech space because, financial institutions, they can't just throw stuff in chat GPT and call it a day. So they've got to build proprietary models. But when you're building a proprietary model, you have to also think about how is this going to be functional to the end user, and how much of it will be visible, and how much are we making sure to disclose it properly? Can people come in and use it effectively in that intuitive way that we talked about? So, a couple different sides to that coin.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that with some of these things like a Figma or whatever, some other things that have popped up, people might try and do more of a DIY, to your point, lovable. It's like, oh, I can get something up super quick.
Mhm.
But it sounds like on the back end of that, you become kind of a life raft to pull them out of the muck. Because to your point, like, yeah, you might have something up quickly, but does that mean it's got follows like kind of the user centered design principles from like the entire experience and product flow perspective? And if you have to change those things to tweak, any piece of it, it's a lot harder from a vibe coding baseline than, a production solid code application. So I could definitely see that happening. I didn't think of it that way until you mentioned it, but definitely can see the possibility there.
Yeah, and it's funny too when we start thinking about some of the vibe coding solutions, because stuff will come out of there that looks good, right? It's got a good UI. And so we talk a lot about the difference between UI and UX. And the UI is how you make it look good, and the UX is really about making it functional and usable for people. And so when it comes out and it looks good and it's got those nice pretty buttons and like pleasing fonts, and the colors look nice, and so you've got this coming out of there. I think it can be hard to identify if you're not looking at it every single day like we are. It can be hard to identify that it takes 17 clicks for somebody to get to what they're trying to do, or the labeling is bad, so people can't figure out how to access some of these features. We talk a lot about you should make it easy for your customers to put money in your pocket. And some of these solutions that we see, it's very hard for users to put money in your pocket.
We want to give you money. I don't know how to give you money.
Not even joking. We have had so many projects that we've worked on where people are desperately trying to give businesses money and cannot figure out how to do it because the UX is so poor. And so we fix that for people. It's not that expensive to fix a lot of these things, but it can have a really great ROI on the other end of it. But it's difficult if you're not sure if it looks good and it's pretty coming out of these vibe coded products. So it's hard to identify that it's difficult for people to put money in your pocket.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I do like to ask a couple of GTM questions just because I focus a lot on growth. And I know you mentioned that a lot of, your early business was just being in the tech industry and kind of your experience and being well known. I guess over time, that it sounds like some of the levers you pulled to get where you are now. I guess more recently, have you had to kind of change your approach and some of the different channels you look at? Have you experimented with anything? Do you see things that are kind of working now that didn't work in the past or vice versa?
It's kind of a tough question. In the beginning, in the early days, it was really challenging because when we first launched, it was the height of the pandemic. We literally could not leave our houses. And top of that, every bit of work we had ever done before in our entire careers was covered under NDAs. So we couldn't show anything. And I have to say that my co-founder and I are the least risk averse people on the planet. So for us to launch a business in this situation, I don't know what it says, but it says something. And so here we are, we're sitting at home, can't leave the house, and we can't show anybody any work. So we had to find a way to convince people that we had the chops for this work without being able to show anything or go anywhere. And that was really, really challenging in the beginning. So, all we could really do was talk about what we had done in the past, work with the people that we knew in our networks to say, will you refer us because you have worked with us in the past? Will you be a referral? Will you talk to us, or will you connect us with somebody? We also had a lot of people who came to us who had worked with us in the past and kind of knew. And so that allowed us to sort of build up our portfolio. These days, I do think that the vibe coding is making it a little bit more difficult out there. I think we're in that, the Gartner hype cycle, right? Where, you're at the high, we're at the peak hype right now. And so that is making it a little bit more difficult. But the customers who know that they need UX, they've always known that they need UX. And so What are we doing now? Let's see here. We still really focus heavily on referrals. We're not really big on outbound, mostly because we're so invested in doing things very ethically. And sometimes the outbound can feel a little spammy, and we don't like to do that. It doesn't feel good. It feels like we're reaching out to people without their consent, which doesn't quite feel right either. But a lot of it really is. I've been to 9 conferences this year. So it's a lot of meeting people in person, understanding their needs and talking to people, because a lot of people don't know that they need UX because it's a industry jargon term, right? And so like what the heck does UX even mean? People think that it means making it pretty. And so a lot of times when we're talking to people, we can say, "Hey, you mentioned to me that you can't get any conversions with this app and it's you're struggling with that, and like we can help with that."
Yeah, and to your point, like outbound, it might be hard to figure out, does this specific type of client kind of align with our values as well? Whereas with some of the referrals, I mean, they know what you're about, right? And so then they can say, hey, I think this would be a good fit for you or not, versus you're probably going to get a stronger signal there than someone that's just like, doing something nefarious, which there's plenty of people that not even doing something nefarious, but just doesn't care about the same kind of principles that you might. And to your point, yeah, conferences, it is funny how many times I think people either don't know about UX or conflate it with UI, just kind of visual appeal. I guess, what do you see as far as when you're interacting at these conferences or talking to potential clients? Is there a pretty wide spectrum on like the education and maturity angle of like even knowing what UX is or like how to think about, kind of that user centric growth? Or is that a pretty new principle that you have to kind of bring them up the curve before you can have kind of a legitimate conversation with them?
I think it depends on the industry and where we are. So, we had a guy that we talked to in Silicon Valley, and he was so funny because he said, y'all do product strategy work. And what can we do to get more into that? Because people are beating down our door for product strategy work, and we just don't have the chops to be able to do it. Like, how do we even learn? And I was like, that is so funny because I don't know that we have ever had a customer from Birmingham, Alabama book specifically for product strategy, although a lot of them need it, And so I think that the terminology is different in different areas, and maybe some of the things haven't necessarily always reached all of the corners of the earth. Right. The software developers we work with, we tend to do a ton of work with software developers, and they know exactly what they need. They're like, "You do UX? Yes, let's go." So we're talking to small businesses or startups. They're not quite sure how it's different from that UI piece, and they're not quite sure what the ROI can really look like. So we tend to explain, we do a lot of market education on like, how is this different? So one of my favorite stories to tell is we worked with a marketing company a few years ago, and they had this stunningly beautiful web app that they had worked on. I mean, it was so pretty. We could not have made it prettier if we had tried. It really looked sharp. And they had spent all of this the customer had spent all of this money on marketing, and they had great SEO, and they were getting thousands of visitors every day, but like 0% conversions. And they came to us in a panic and they said, "What can we do? We just need 1% of these people to convert. Like, this is so stressful. The company is struggling. They're mad at us. They want a refund. Like, how can we help?" And so we got in there, and what we found was it was just like we talked about earlier, it was very hard for people to put money in the company's pocket. I mean, it was in order to more or less book their service, I think it was something like 20 steps, and it took like 2 weeks to do. It was horrible. So we decreased that down, made it a lot faster, a lot more intuitive, made it more clear to the users how they were going to access these services and like what they were going to get and all of these things. And we bumped them up to 20%, but without changing how it looked. So it was strictly, user journey, making sure that they understood the workflow, things were labeled correctly, that we were decreasing the number of steps that it took and doing it in a really intuitive way. And I think that's such a good way to explain the difference between UI and UX. So we have that conversation a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting that even I know this is more like design, but like the Apple concept of like minimal clicks for the user, simplified design was, from Jobs way back in the day. But I feel like people now, businesses too, have shorter attention spans than ever. And
Mhm.
but at the same time, people can spin up features, I feel like, faster with AI and different things where like, oh, we can offer this, this, and this, lose sight of the like, it's more important now, more than ever, to think about that user journey, keep it as
Yeah.
simple as possible, as streamlined as possible, and oriented towards the right goal. Because I think also to your point, you can have something beautiful, or you can have tons of like website visitors or like vanity metrics,
Mhm.
but what matters, conversion, money in the bank, right? So it's an interesting perspective. And I guess to that point, like when you think about your business and like metrics or like what types of KPIs, and have to be actual KPIs itself, but like what types of things are important to you? Or if you like one way to look at it is like if you see this start to go down, you as a CEO want to spend like more than 50% on your time on fixing that until it's to a place where you want it to be.
I That's a hard question for me because I feel like our business model is maybe a little bit different than a lot of other people's.
Yeah.
So when we launched our business, we were very heavily invested in doing the right thing and providing a good work environment. And that's the key to what we're doing over here. We're not trying to just artificially increase headcount all the time. We're not trying to have the biggest office with the biggest sign on our door. A lot of these things that we feel like people in the tech industry often focus on. We've never taken outside funding. These are things that are less important to us, but are very important to a lot of people. So for us, our biggest KPIs that we're looking at are obviously we want to make revenue. I mean, that goes without saying. I would never take away from that. And we obviously want to have leads and we want to have good lead conversion when we do talk to people. But a lot of the focus for us is around making sure that we're delivering high quality software solutions to people. So we really want our customers to be happy with our work. And so you don't pay us until you are happy with everything that we've delivered. And, that customer satisfaction is really, really important. Making sure that our employees are happy. So we pay everybody a living wage. We make sure that we have a lot of internal culture processes that are going on to make sure that we are treating everybody right and treating people fairly. We donate 1% of our profits to charitable organizations that align with our goals. We do a lot of pro bono mentoring work. These are the things that kind of keep us going. And at the end of the day, if we can feel good about the products that we're putting out into the world, I think that's all that really matters to us.
Yeah, right. It's like the revenue is a piece of the puzzle that helps you make that bigger impact, right? And deliver good quality outputs
Mhm.
for your customers and continue to do all the things like the 1% contribution that you talked about, right? It's not the end goal, but it's kind of like an enabler of those
Yeah.
things.
The revenue comes, right, when we are making sure to deliver such high quality, inclusive solutions to people and we have a good work environment. All of the revenue, it comes. It always comes. Of course, we're making sure that we're, tactically and strategically staying on top of our revenue goals, but at the end of the day, the most important thing for us is doing the right thing and creating the world that we want to live in.
And to that point, I know we're getting to the top of the hour. If you think about 6 to 12 months from now and put on the rose colored glasses of optimism, the type of impact you want to make, and kind of where you want to see Lunar Lab, what does that look like for you over the next
It's
year or so?
It's such a hard question because, I wanna keep my kids fed, right? I'm not trying to be somebody who is out on a super yacht or something like that. But for Lunar Lab, our biggest goals are around what our clients do. And so when we have a client that goes out and they, bring our strategy to their investors and they're able to get a $10 million investment, or if they are able to launch in 20 markets, or we had a customer recently that was able to sign with the NFL, which is like a really cool contract for them. When they're able to achieve these things and we see that they're doing it with software that is really ethical, it's really inclusive stuff that we can stand behind, it feels good. And that is honestly the biggest thing that we can hope for. And that's the main thing that keeps us going, I think, is when we can watch our customers be successful, when we can see them get to 20% lead conversion, or we see their businesses ramping up and they're able to make all of these sales. It's really exciting for us.
Really, when the whole ecosystem thrives, you thrive as well. I think that's a great
Exactly.
goal. Well,
Yeah.
Elizabeth, where can people find more about you, what Lunar Lab is doing? Where should they look?
Yeah, we are always on LinkedIn. So if you go on LinkedIn, type in Lunar Lab, all one word, LUNARLAB, no S at the end. So Lunar Lab, put it in LinkedIn. Elizabeth Anderson, I'm on LinkedIn as well if you look for Lunar Lab. And you can find our website at www.lunarlab.io. And we would love to talk to you. We do lots of conversations just for free. We don't do a lot of high pressure sales tactics. So if you're like, I don't know, do I need their help? Call us. And if we can't help you, we'll refer you to somebody who can.
That's great. Thanks, Elizabeth, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. This was fantastic.